Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
Trump administration is suing New York State over immigration enforcement right now. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi made that announcement yesterday and had a warning for other states.
You don't comply with federal law, we will hold you accountable. We did it to Illinois. Strike one. Strike two is New York. And if you are a state not complying with federal law, you're next. Get ready.
Pam Bondi just sued Letitia James, Governor Hochul, and the head of the DMV in New York for ignoring a federal mandate. And that's what's going to happen. If you defy what is signed and executed and what the American people, frankly, voted for on November 5th, you will get sued. You are a state official, federal government. There's something called the chain of command. And that's exactly what I meant by it.
New York State Attorney General Letitia James says state laws protect all New Yorkers and that she is, quote, prepared to defend our laws just as I always have, end quote.
Here's a big question we've been getting for the last few weeks. Are we, as Black Americans, betraying our ancestors by not getting out there and protesting Trump's deportations? After all, we keep being told, wasn't the civil rights movement about, well, civil rights? The first response to that talking point is, first of all, citizens have rights. That's what the civil rights movement was about, citizens' rights. Foreigners only have privileges. And although even foreigners do have a certain amount of human rights, they're actually bare bones, and not one of those human rights is the right to just walk into some place and stay because you don't want to leave. Now, this is something that needs to be talked about, why Black Americans are not getting out there and saying, oh, we're going to have some sort of alliance with all of these other groups. Because when Black Americans tried to make that alliance for the last 60 plus years, the other groups said they weren't interested. And this is the result. The Orange Man's announcing a huge, or he would say, huge, diplomatic breakthrough. Strange words coming from him. Well, is he talking about Ukraine or Gaza? No, he's talking about Panama. As CBS reported, on Wednesday, that's Wednesday of last week, an American military flight deported Asian migrants who were in U.S. immigration custody to Panama, the first known deportation of its kind under the Trump administration. They included adults and families with children from Afghanistan, China, India, Iran, and Uzbekistan, according to documents. Another U.S. military flight to Panama planned for Thursday is expected to deport more Asian migrants, in addition to some African deportees. The documents show they include migrants from Cameroon. Now, I consider the part about Cameroonians to be particularly interesting because back during the first Trump administration, there were serious accusations and even lawsuits from Cameroonians who were rounded up and who claimed to have been tortured into signing consent to be deported. They claim that these alleged abuses happened in Mississippi, of all places, so I can totally believe that it happened. But my question is, if this is what was going on during the first Trump administration, why didn't we hear much about it? Because it wasn't the hallmark of his administration at that time. That's why. But it's very interesting. You have a whole lot of people who thought that they were in the good graces of white supremacy because they would either claim that they were some sort of hard-working migrants, and they would always compare themselves to us. They always wanted to go ahead and dump on us. Or you had people who tried to say that they were model minority, what have you, and white supremacy was looking and going, you know what, we're going to use these guys until we have no more use for them, and then they're going too. And of course, it doesn't stop there. From the South China Morning Post, an estimated 79% of undocumented residents in Los Angeles County are natives of Mexico and Central America. Asian immigrants make up the second largest group, constituting 16% of people in the county without legal authorization, according to the Migration Policy Institute. Across the U.S., Indians make up the third largest group of undocumented residents behind Mexicans and Salvadorians. So I guess this is the reason why that guy who got himself fired and rehired by Doge was sitting there talking about how all of these Indian immigrants need to be kicked out, that they all gotta go. Yeah, you see, while a lot of folks, including black folks, were not keeping a mental tally of who the largest group of illegal aliens is and the second and third these white supremacists have, they've always been keeping tabs on it. And the very people who they claimed that they were sticking by, you had garbage like Ed Blum and others taking photos with them. All the while they were thinking, as soon as we go ahead and get these little old court rulings filed, y'all are going to be put on those doggone planes out of here. Which is exactly what Black Americans for decades have been warning would happen. No matter how chummy these white supremacists pretended to be with these people in their little press conferences and their public meetings, it was all cap, it was all performance, and this is the reality. One Asian American advocate spokesman was quoted as saying that Asian immigrants who lack legal status tend to work often in industries where Asian American communities over generations have established a strong presence. Yeah, and don't think that these white supremacists don't know that. Whenever they decide that it's finally time to break one of their tools, first thing they look and see is, okay, they got a strong presence in these areas. All right, we're going to rip them out root and branch. We can go ahead and dissect them and dismantle them this way. Oh, they got a strong presence. Yeah, we're going to hit them where they think that they're strong. That's what they usually do. It's time to run the competition out because they had no permanent plans for them in the first place. This is exactly what Black Americans warned would eventually happen, because you had other people who were sitting there thinking, oh, these white supremacists, they're cool with this. You know, they act as if they like us. They're so pleasant and such. But as I've always told you, family, white supremacy, they love a cruel prank, especially one that takes a long time to pay off. And the longer it takes, the sweeter it is for them. They savor that stuff. They savor it because they know that the payoff is going to be crushing. It's going to absolutely destroy them. And they get off on that kind of cruelty. They like the idea of having the mark sitting there thinking, oh, these people, they think that you're their buddy. They think that you're their friend. They're sitting there thinking to themselves that they're on the inside. They're thinking everything's hunky-dory. Meanwhile, they got these other people around them who every day look at them as like, man, when it's finally time to lower the boom on them, oh man, to see the look on their faces, all that glee, all of that joy and smiling that you see from all of these folks on the white right and others who are sitting there laughing about this. Yeah, this is white supremacist culture that you're seeing in the raw. They love this stuff. As far as they're concerned, this is everything they wanted it to be. That's not just them simply laughing because something's cruel. The cruelty is what gives them joy and such, but it's largely because this is an expression of personal philosophy on their part. They love cruel pranks. As far as they're concerned, this one's paying off in spades. They love it. And now you got all these other groups who are sitting there dumbfounded and confused going, but, you let us stay here for like 20 years or more. We thought that you liked us. And the white supremacists are looking at them, laughing in their faces and going, yeah, that's what makes it so hilarious. You actually believed it. That's what makes it so funny. The South China Morning Post continues, many undocumented Vietnamese work at nail salons, many Cambodians at donut shops, and many Indians in the hotel and motel industry. In Monterey Park, a common landing spot for Chinese migrants, employment agencies routinely connect workers with jobs at warehouses, restaurants, and marijuana farms, with no work permit required. So basically, when it comes to all of these people coming here illegally or illegally, you got these so-called employment agencies, they got the hookup for them. Hey, you got no papers? No problem. Now, with stats like that clearly these white supremacists have been aware of from the very jump, that Indians would be the third largest group to be deported, I have to wonder, because we already know that Kamala Harris wouldn't say anything about this, but I wonder if Dinesh D'Souza will be cheerleading for these mass deportations of Indians when we start seeing large numbers of them being rounded up and shackled up and put on planes. Is he going to be cheerleading for that? Will Mindy Kaling's brother be cheesing with Ed Blum and celebrating this development as well? You already got these folks on the white right saying, well, that whole model minority thing, that was all just a myth. That was all just a con. Yeah, they're letting the mask slip. And that being the case, the folks who thought to themselves that they were going to be somehow circumventing white supremacy and somehow getting in good with the bad guys if they just use certain verbiage, they're going to be finding those words thrown in their faces. Look at what the story says. No work permit required. So you have employers who are hiring people and knowing that they're in the country illegally. Now, this is something else I've talked about for many years. You cannot really say that you're serious about stopping illegal immigration unless you also dismantle the economic infrastructure that's been built to support it, namely the unscrupulous landlords who rent to them, banks who allow them to have accounts and transmit money regardless of whether they're here illegally or not, but most of all, the criminal employers who make it a point to hire people knowing full well that they're in the country illegally. Unless these entities are made to suffer consequences for this behavior, the problem won't stop, because these entities are the main ones who incentivize illegal immigration, and they make it where these people know that there's a pre-existing group who's going to support them when they get here, even though these people know full well that it's illegal. This is about money, but since the landlords, employers, and banks are not black, there's a hands-off policy regarding them, and these banks have been giving illegal aliens loans, big ones, for decades now. These same banks, however, illegally discriminate against black Americans through illegal redlining and other illegal racist maneuvers, and yet those same banks give these undocumented migrants loans to buy homes, build their businesses, or otherwise pursue their financial goals. And the U.S. government knows this, and the U.S. government boldly protects this criminal practice. Now, how can I be so sure that the feds are aware of this? Because in 2023, during the Biden administration, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Elizabeth Warren's pet project, they put out a joint statement with the Justice Department threatening banks if they turn down people for loans just because they're in the country illegally. Quote, lenders should not deny people the opportunity to take out a loan to buy a home, build their businesses, or otherwise pursue their financial goals because of unlawful bias and without regard to their actual ability to repay, said Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. This guidance reminds lenders that denying someone access to credit based solely on their actual or perceived immigrant status may violate federal law. I mean, look at all the qualifiers there. Going out of their way. This is to remind you that if you're denying someone access to credit based on their actual or even perceived immigrant status, that may violate federal law. Now, what's that meant to do? That's meant to put a chilling effect on them. If you're looking and going, wait a minute here, this person's not even in the country legally, what are the chances that this person gets the money and they just skip town? Well, you can't consider that. You can't think about that. That shouldn't even matter. You better not think about it. You're violating federal law. Federal law for people who are not American citizens? So when you have people from foreign countries who come to the U.S. and get loans easily and then use them to start their businesses, to buy homes, and then they tell black people like you and me that we're lazy and that they just work harder than us, remember these same banks redline us and openly discriminate against us. And then when we routinely remind them of all the laws and policies and the rules that have been passed that give them their opportunities, they deny it outright and claim that they haven't benefited in any way. Why, everything they have is the result of their own hard work, dent, and industry, and it certainly wasn't the result of the dominant society giving them anything. Why, that's ridiculous. You see, this is why all of these groups have had no interest in any so-called alliance with us, because as they saw it, they were already in an alliance with white supremacy. And for a while, it seemed like they were right. So when they talk about how I came to this country with 2 pennies and I built a business, and if you haven't, it's because you're just lazy. You see, they always leave out the part about the easy loans that they were given and all the benefits that they received too that were baked in the cake set aside for them simply because they were immigrants, and the hands-off policy that the U.S. government had regarding them. It's the same way that white society leaves out things like the Homestead Act and the countless veterans benefits that white GIs received after both world wars that black GIs were categorically shut out of, and how the suburbs were built with black taxpayer money, and then the government allowed racial covenants, redlining, and discriminatory housing pricing to freeze black homeowners out of these places that our taxpayer dollars were used to build, and the tons of other white-skinned benefits that other people received that we didn't. And due to these massive billions of dollars that have been given, this has allowed these immigrant enclaves to not only become established, but also to thrive. This is what's allowed people to have such immediate upward mobility that black Americans have been prohibited from having. And I'm sure you noticed that our friend Kristen Clark was the person who made this statement. She's also the child of immigrants, and here she was using the bully pulpit of the Justice Department's unlimited resources to threaten lending institutions and tell them, if you consider somebody's legal status in the country when giving them a loan, if you decide that you're not going to give them a loan because they're in the country illegally, well, we're coming after you. So in other words, you got to give money to them regardless of if they're in the country legally or not. And even if the person, if you decide to overlook their illegal status, if they say, well, Kristen Clark, I didn't get that loan. Sure, I don't have any papers, and sure, I broke into the country, but I didn't get that loan I was looking for. You need to go ahead and sue that bank. Guess what? She'd be all over it. And if anyone were to point out, hey, the people who are claiming that they've been discriminated against because they're in the country illegally, they are in the country illegally. That's a crime in and of itself. And that's what's supposed to trigger a deportation. Their very presence is illegal because they didn't have any sort of paperwork, which means, of course, their presence is illegal. That's what undocumented means. They decide to use undocumented because they felt that illegal was a tad bit too direct. Oh, by the way, on a side note, Elon Musk, for his own personal reasons, is attacking the CFPB. Now, you have the left corner of the white media going into hysterics about him doing this, saying that this agency is vital to protecting American consumers, but by their own words, the CFPB has dedicated itself to helping people who are not Americans at all. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that we root for the racist little reprobate from South Africa. What it does mean, however, is that we recognize that, as Neely Fuller said, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation. So, in many instances like this one, there isn't anyone to root for. So we won't. But what needs to be understood is that the success immigrants have had has been because the politicians have engineered it into the laws and the policies that they've passed, as well as how they carry out their own offices. Black Americans, on the other hand, have been categorically locked out, while people who are not in the country legally have been given ready access to all kinds of money and benefits, both from the government and from private business. And yet we're told by these exact same groups that they just work harder than we do, and that the reason that they can leapfrog black people is because they have a superior culture, superior work ethic, etc. But of course, the government's own words say otherwise. Black Americans have not at all been lazy. We've been the hardest working group here. We've been categorically shut out of these opportunities that we made possible. Now, when it comes to protesting the immigration crackdown, there's been some modest protests, mostly in large cities, but it hasn't amounted to anything. Only a few hundred people at most attend, and this is in the big cities. And when you look at the crowds, you see practically no black faces at all. What that means is a critical mass of black people have gotten the memo. We, foundational black Americans in particular, are not getting involved in this. The people who the orange man is targeting are the ones who told us for generations that we're lazy. And when you have people who are marking themselves as white on driver's licenses and job applications and on census forms, well, at that point, you don't get to claim racism is the reason this is happening. You see, that's what a lot of folks have been trying to do. They want to have it both ways. And that's what apparently black Americans made possible. But by withdrawing, or at the very least saying, hey, leave us out of this, that eliminates their ability to claim that it's about race. And they were the ones who wanted to claim that they had transcended race and race wasn't a problem. Okay, keep that same energy now. You don't get to say that race is a problem now. Now, a lot of them, though, they're suddenly remembering, wait a minute, this country is racist. No, it's not. You guys claimed that you were the proof that America was not some racist country, that black Americans were just making it up. Okay, well, in that case, then, since we were making it up, I'm sure you'll go ahead and stick to your story, right? I'm not trying to draft anyone onto my team. If people want to consider themselves to be whatever, then so be it. They believe propaganda like Amy Chua's book, The Triple Package, where she was trying to claim that Asians were superior to black people based on culture, so be it. They believed clowns like Thomas Sowell and others who claimed that these other groups were accepted by white power and that those pesky FBAs were only complaining because they didn't want to work hard like these other groups do. Fine then. Keep that same energy. Stick to those talking points. Because white power is not listening to any of that talk about superior culture or about hard work or Amy Chua's talking points about, well, these people have superior work ethic to black folks. Man, these white supremacists don't care about that. White supremacy was not based on hard work, dent, and industry. It was based on ruthlessness. It was based on thievery. It was based on lies. And for the people who are confused in all this, why is it that black Americans have made it very clear that they're not going to be putting on the cape for anybody? Well, just understand something. We're not going to be allowing anyone to use the civil rights movement to justify their agenda. The civil rights movement was very specific to a specific group of people. And to compare migrants, legal or otherwise, to Dr. King, the Freedom Riders, civil rights marchers, or anyone else is ludicrous. Dr. King and the civil rights movement, they were not migrants. They were not people from outside the U.S. They were people whose blood runs deeper than anyone else in this land. What's going on here has nothing to do with the civil rights movement, and we will not lend the good offices of our struggle to anyone else's agenda. We allowed too much of that already. The reason black Americans are not getting involved is because we've always put on the cape for everybody else. We've always had some attention-seeking fools out there, usually tethers, claiming to speak for us, whenever other groups are sitting here fighting for their privileges and opportunities that they actually get. We always have some fool out there falsely saying that black Americans side with the people who came to the U.S. illegal or otherwise, overstayed their visa, always trying to make us into the mascot for everybody else's agenda. And the white media would make sure to put the camera in front of those very individuals. Well, now those same tethers are getting targeted too, which I guess explains why they're suddenly not so eager to get in front of the cameras. And if black people don't stand up for these other groups, nobody else is going to. We always take the slings and arrows and daggers and knives that everybody else has thrown at them. We always try to play super Negro and save the day for everyone else, only for them to turn around and call us nigger afterwards. And that's the reason why black folks have said we're not getting involved. We thought that we were proving ourselves to be good allies with everybody else, but in the end, it takes two to have an alliance, and nobody wanted to be in an alliance with us. That's just the reality. Everyone wanted to come to the U.S. to enjoy the world's most powerful economy that we built and made possible, and to enjoy the rights that we fought for and died for and the laws and programs that we fought to get passed. And then when they felt they had a foot in the door, they sided with racists like Ed Blum and Chris Rufo and the Republican Party because they thought that they would form an alliance with the white supremacists. And their problem isn't that they see the error of their ways. That's not what's going on with these people who are having buyer's remorse. Their problem is that their brilliant strategy to get over at our expense didn't work. That's their regret. When Peter Liang murdered Akai Gurley, you had nationwide protests. You had Asians literally cross the country. Well, he just made a mistake. He certainly doesn't need to be charged. Now, why would any quote-unquote minority be out there cheerleading for the police to be able to kill somebody and not be punished? Why? Because as certain individuals like the Dinesh D'Souza's, the Amy Chuas, and the Michelle Malkins, all of them on the payrolls of these white conservative think tanks, they've been saying for the longest time that basically they had proven to themselves that they were basically more or less white adjacent. And as a result, they were demanding the same genetic immunity from law that the dominant society enjoys. This was supposed to be their entree into those kind of circles. As far as they're concerned, wait a minute, you're supposed to be making sure that we don't get punished for that. I mean, they only killed a black person. If you're going to be prosecuting Peter Liang for killing Akai Gurley in cold blood, well, if he's not being given an exemption from the law, then what does that say about the rest of us? And this is the reason that black people are not getting involved. What's happening is you got a bunch of people who are finding themselves being targeted by their former allies. That's what's happening here. People wanted to ally themselves with white power. Well, they need to go tell the Stephen Millers and Ed Blums and Chris Rufos and the other reprobates, hey, we're all on the same side, remember? Tell them that black people are lazy and dumb and beneath them and inferior culture. Repeat all the canned anti-black racist talking points that they've been saying for over a century now. All of that racism that they bring from their home countries, all of that anti-black bigotry that they bring here, go ahead and repeat that stuff. Surely that will stop ICE from coming and getting them. And surely that will cause all of these mouthpieces on the white right to finally stick up for them, right? Surely that will do it, right? Black Americans have been warning about this for the longest time, and now that that day is here, what do they expect us to say? The deportation laws need to be enforced. And if anybody wants to claim, well, haven't we heard that Trump intends to bring some South Africans here? Man, the South Africans, the white ones over there, they happen to be living off the fat of the land. Those people are still living as good as they ever did under apartheid. That's the reason why you don't see them in a hurry to get here. All that garbage about, oh, they're persecuting the white South Africans. Man, those people are the most pampered, comforted, wealthy, oppressed people on the planet. That's me being sarcastic. They're not oppressed at all. It's the same old whining that we always heard from the dominant society. Lies. That's their stock and trade. So, by the way, even if they were making some sort of exception and saying, well, we're not going to be deporting white people, at least not en masse, we're not going to be. Well, the only thing I would say to the Asians and the Hispanics and the Africans and Caribbeans is, what did you expect? We told you that white power was not going to be applying the same leniency to you that it does to those that it classifies as white. We have been warning about this for decades. And people thought to themselves that as long as they dumped on black Americans, and even the people from Africa and Caribbean would do the same things, everybody thought to themselves, hey, we know what the rules of racism are. People have known about it ever since at least the 19th century. All of those immigrants coming to the U.S. from Europe, from Germany, and from Ireland and elsewhere, they knew exactly what the first rule was. If you want to prove to the dominant society that you want to be on the team, go ahead and show that you have total allegiance to the racial pecking order. And the bottom of that pecking order is foundational black Americans. Show that you're willing to dump on them. Show that you're willing to say that they're lazy and stupid and all the rest of it. Go ahead and repeat every anti-black talking point that you've had handed to you by white supremacy. If you do that, you'll be on the team. You'll be white supremacist adjacent. And this was the result. That's the reason why black folks are not putting on the cape. And I'm not sure why that bothers anyone. After all, Black Americans are lazy. Black Americans are dumb. Black Americans don't want to work. Oh, Black Americans are all criminals. Black Americans are all this, that, and the third. Everything negative. And they teach that in their home countries. They start doing this stuff before they get to the U.S. This is what they say about Black Americans in their home countries. When they have not met a Black American and no Black American ever did anything to them, we didn't do anything to these people. And yet they attack us and assail us nonstop. Okay, that being the case, if Black Americans are so dumb and lazy and no work ethic and inferior culture and all criminals like that, you shouldn't mind Black Americans sitting this one out, because after all, Black Americans wouldn't have been much help anyway, right? Right? Everyone's trying to get us to get involved. They want us to lend our voices to this because everybody recognizes that there is no substitute for the moral legitimacy that foundational Black Americans represent. When we step forward, everyone recognizes that we define who and what is the right side of the issue. For 500 years, we have been the fulcrum upon which history is turned. For half a millennium, we have been the ones who have been defining the right side of the issue. When it comes time to talk about the longest, the most sustained, and highest regarded freedom struggle in the history of humankind, they're talking about us. That's why everybody tries to compare themselves to us. And now people are shocked and confused because for the first time in decades, we've said, you know what? We're not going to have that anymore. Everybody needs to compare themselves to themselves. You had groups who cheered when we were being mistreated, and they also cheered when it was done in their home countries and said, oh, well, there's no racism here. You shouldn't be trying to compare what happens in America to our countries. Okay, fine then. Don't compare what happens to America to yours either. In many cases, you had people who took part in that mistreatment. Well, we're not going that far. We're not going to be taking part in anybody's mistreatment. In this case, we won't be cheering on Musk, and we're not going to be throwing any ticker tape parades for ICE either necessarily. And if there's still anybody who insists that we need to stand up and step up for some sort of minority coalition, and that we have some sort of obligation to support other groups in this case, the only thing I have to say to that is we are supporting them the exact same way they've always supported us. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Charles Hairston, James Brown, Black Truth United, Brian Walton, and Bobby Ross. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.